Sandhan. All Gujarat Integrated Classroom.
સેટેલાઇટના માધ્યમથી જોડતી કડી એટલે સંધાન.
Hello friends, today we are going to discuss one of the most important schools of 20th century criticism, which is called Practical and New Criticism. Before that, let me introduce the two faculties who are going to discuss this topic with you today. My name is Bhageshri Trivedi. I work as a teaching faculty at the Department of English at the MS University of Baroda, and with me here I have Ms. Pooja Chakraborty, who is working as a visiting faculty at the MS University of Baroda. Let us look at the first slide, which tells us about the topic of today. The name of this slide is Practical and New Criticism. As some of you might already know, practical criticism and new criticism was one of the most important and influential schools of criticism in 20th century. This was also one of the first organized and institutionalized school of criticism that we see at the beginning of the 20th century. Let us look at the order in which we are going to progress with this presentation. Let us look at the first slide. Here we have outlined the purpose of today's presentation. We will be first looking at the historical background of practical criticism and new criticism. After that, we shall look into detail into the tenets of these two, and after that we will look at what were the responses in terms of the strengths as well as limitations of these two schools of practical criticism and new criticism. So let us begin with the first topic at hand, which is the historical background of 20th century criticism in general. The focus of critical practices changed at the beginning of the 20th century. There are 3 points which outlined the major shifts in trend that took place at the beginning of the 20th century. The first one was a reaction to commercialized world, especially the bourgeois world of utility and value. Pooja, would you like to elaborate on this aspect of the turn at the beginning of the 20th century?
Yes, thank you, ma'am. The 20th century, as we all know, evidenced two ugly world wars. The World War I, which began in the year 1914 and ended up in 1919, and World War II, which began in the year 1939 and ended up in 1945. What happened after these wars was that there was a constant change that was observed in all the arenas of life, which were social, psychological and academic. People had lost faith in already established values, as a result of which it paved way for new values, and hence it gave rise to many such theories. Two of such we are going to discuss today, which are practical criticism and new criticism. Along with them, there were other theories such as modernism and post-modernism, which highly revolved around the two topics that we are going to discuss in details today.
Absolutely. One of the major changes that took place with the bourgeois world of utility and value was that there was a rise of utilitarianism and commercialism. Therefore, there was a privileging of everything that had direct use value. We can see this and read this in the theories at the beginning or at the end of the 19th century in the theories of John Stuart Mill. The bourgeois world was the world structured by the rise of the new middle class, which was marked by financial and commercial success, but at the same time there was a devaluation of aesthetic values. Art, as we all know, is something that is not believed to have any direct aesthetic value, and therefore this was also marked by a devaluation of art and devaluation of the aesthetic. There was not just a devaluation, but there was a second current as well. This current was subordination of the art to moral and cultural values. We can read about this in the critical theories of critical theories of the function of criticism that we see in the at the end of the 19th century, where there is a critic who talks about how criticism is one that will contribute to, or that will take away the philistinism that the commercialism and utilitarianism of the bourgeois world has brought about. We can talk and discuss in further about this in the second slide. Okay. The point B is the exaltation of the aesthetic that we see in the beginning of the 20th century. This is something that especially reminds me of the art for art's sake movement, especially the movement of aestheticism that we see in the latter half of the 19th century. The two major proponents of this aestheticism movement were Walter Pater and Oscar Wilde. Their ideology is summed up in Oscar Wilde's slogan, "Art for art's sake." Their major contention was that the aesthetic experience is an end in itself and that it need not be subordinated to moral concerns or political concerns or religious concerns or even social concerns. Therefore, one does not write a work of art in order to teach certain moral values, nor does one write a work of art for social education or for social instruction. The aesthetic experience or the experience of reading a work of art is an end in itself. I'm also reminded of the fact here that Marxist literary criticism is the one school of criticism which overtly connects the political with the literary. However, even amongst the Marxist school of critics, it was considered that a work of art that is overtly political in nature is less in value. Therefore, literary works have the advantage of providing the human society with aesthetic experience, which is one of the superior forms of experience available to human beings. And therefore, when we see the movement towards exaltation of the aesthetic, we see that there is a movement towards intrinsic value in the aesthetic experience itself, divorced from moral concerns, social concerns, political and religious concerns. The next point that we have is the attempt to systemize criticism in the 20th century. Pooja, would you like to elaborate on this thing?
Yes. The attempt to systematize criticism. Now, what happened in the 20th century was that when we talk about language in any given experience, we see that it is more complex than the way it can be actually understood. For example, if we take the example of love that Nagarjun discusses in his book, he says that love is different for different people. But when we talk about explaining love, we use the same word under same umbrella of the term. Hence, to discuss on this point, what happened was that the 20th century.
There are many associations associated with love, as you very rightly pointed out, that love is an experience that has different sensations, different experiences for different people, and yet we have the same word for it.
Yes. So the 20th century, the criticism which came up, it veered away from using overtly dramatic language, and they moved towards a place where we could find a place where we are supposed to use much more simple language.
Therefore, there was a movement away from impressionism, I would say, that the critic no longer could talk about the impressions that a work of art made on himself or herself, or even if he or she talked about these impressions, he had to analyze in detail that why and how these impressions were being caused. When we are talking about the systematization of criticism, we can even talk about the three major trends that we see in all the critical practices before 20th century criticism. The first trend is that criticism meant the responses of a very scholarly and well-read person on any given work of art or any given author, and therefore criticism could in that way be equated to an author's appeasement of a scholarly person called a critic, or the responses of a critic to art. The second trend was adherence to tradition. This is the trend I was earlier talking about, in which I only signaled at who the critic was. But now I shall be able to give you a name of the critic. The name of the critic was Matthew Arnold, and he gave us the essay The Function of Criticism. In this essay, he talks about a theory called the touchstone theory of poetry. By the touchstone theory, he is trying to tell us that there is a body of great works of poetry or great works of art, and every new work will be categorized as either great or not great based on whether it adheres to or whether it approximates to the touchstone, the great works of art and literature that existed before it. Therefore, here we see a second trend of criticism, which meant that a work of art is great if it approximates to tradition or if it falls into the parameters of the canon. The third trend that we found was the trend that came with the Romantic critics in the 19th century. According to this trend, a work of art was original if it broke with the tradition or if it broke from the work of great artists, the use of greater artifice in language, the use of exalted themes and extraordinary subject matters in poetry and literature, and it moved on to ordinary themes, focus on nature, focus on one's personal responses and personal impressions on coming into contact with any aspect of experience, and the expression of all these factors of experience in very ordinary and plain language. Therefore, here the parameter of a great work of art was its originality or its individuality, how it asserted its identity as different from that of those who came before this writer. Therefore, two questions that arise here really are that, first of all, whether it would be adequate to have a critic's responses to a work as a parameter of its greatness, because with each individual the responses would change. Therefore, such a school of criticism would end up being highly subjective in nature. When it comes to adherence to tradition, one can raise the question that whether adherence to tradition is in itself necessary and whether this would not lead essentially to a replication of qualities or a replication of forms in literature. The third idea, which is associated with Romanticism, of originality marking a great work of art, brings us to the question as to whether an author's or an artist's break with tradition is in itself important and enough for his or her work to be great or not. Therefore, as we can see, the schools of criticism that came before the 20th century were inconsistent. We see certain theories of art, but they are spurious and fragmentary, and the landscape of literary criticism so far is in many ways arbitrary, and therefore in the 20th century we see a movement towards systematization of criticism, which is done through the scientific study of the literary work of art. How is this scientific study conducted? We will come to know as we move forward. Let us look at the next slide. Practical criticism had two major influences on it. The first influence was the influence of modernism. Modernism was a broad series of movements that came about roughly between 1910 and 1930 in Europe and America. Its major exponents were Joyce, Proust, Eliot, and Pound, and the modernism was effectively a response to the complex economic, political, scientific, and religious developments that took place over the 19th century, which, as Pooja pointed out in the beginning, culminated in the two devastating world wars. Therefore, with the onset of the world wars, with its devastating effects, and with the simultaneous economic depression that came about and psychological demoralization that came about, there was a reaction to every value in every aspect of life that the life before the world war, the world before the world war represented. Therefore, there was a reaction to all the values of the pre existing bourgeois culture. These values are those of rationality, science, and progress. For modernism is a reaction to these aspects of experience, and therefore, the modernists break with this in the following ways. First of all, instead of looking at the linearity of time and the continuity of time which is brought about by the break between the past and present, therefore the past is something that is primitive and the present is associated with modernity and progress. The modernists distance themselves from this and they see a continuity between the past and the present. Therefore, in their works of art, they also focus on the role of time, memory, and history. We shall see how this aspect of the importance of history influences the school of practical criticism. The second point is that poetry has its own internal logic. The modernism brought with it a fragmentation of experience. As we know, the bombings during the two world wars are what significantly changed the way the world was viewed by one and all. And this change was marked by a fragmentation, because as there is mutilation of bodies, there is mutilation of the physical landscapes, there is also a mutilation of the social and moral landscape of values. And therefore, the modernists try to pit the unity or the harmony of the work of art against the fragmentation of experience that they see around them. This idea of the internal unity of a work of art is also taken forward by the proponents of practical criticism. The third point is that experience is more complex than what may be conveyed in literal language. Would you like to elaborate on this?
Yes, as Bhageshri ma'am has stated before, that due to the two devastating world wars, modernism came up as a school of thought which saw the first 2 points. The first is they moved away from the continuity between past and present, and the second point, as stated, is poetry has its own internal logic. The third point that I am going to talk about is